Hi there, I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with Information Security Media Group. Today's topic is risk-based cybersecurity. Here to discuss with me is Doug Howard. He's CEO with Pondurance. Doug, thanks so much for taking time to speak with me today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me again.
So as we start a new year, a lot of similar themes. We hear about threats changing, evolving, and of course, we know that mid-sized organizations in particular struggle to keep up. Over time, their small IT teams have had to bolt on technologies and services. You see them all the time. What are some of the issues you see with where these mid-sized organizations are now, and how will taking a risk-based approach help them?
Yeah, I think we all see it in the news, product vendor pitches, and so forth. You can imagine being a small company, maybe with somebody that has security part-time, maybe 2 or 3 or 5 or 6 people on your team that do security all the time. There's constant noise coming from everywhere. There's constant good information coming from everywhere, and trying to figure out how to actually figure out what you need to focus on as an organization is where we're trying to really help clients get. And that sounds like, oh, okay, well, we're going to bring in some high-end consultants and really, drive a client towards particular things. But our approach is really to integrate that in with our services as much as possible. And so you may remember we bought a company, Bearing Security, which owned My Cyber Scorecard. My Cyber Scorecard actually provides a basis for tracking your security program. And we sold that with our professional services organization. They would come in, you do a risk assessment. We would do a PCI QSA. We would do a CMMC RPO. Any of those compliance areas, or third-party assessments for HIPAA, for example, or high trust, those types of things. But what we've now done is integrated that into our MDR, our 24/7 monitoring. So if you think of managed detection and response, typically what's going to happen is somebody comes in, they throw a blanket over your environment, they do good monitoring of your infrastructure. But in this particular case, we've built in My Cyber Scorecard as assessments along the path. And that helps us align to the customer's security program that they may start with, but also mature them over time and keep them focused on not these noisy things and the whack-a-mole that a lot of organizations have to deal with, but actually the path to having a sustainable security program in place.
So let's talk about risk-based cybersecurity. Now, I host lots of virtual and actual roundtables, talk to security leaders all the time. They pay a lot of lip service to the topic of risk-based approach, but I'm not sure that they have a common definition. From your perspective, what is the risk-based approach, and what do we need to do to get there and stay there?
Yeah, and so if you think about risk-based, to your point, it could be all over the place as far as definitions. And I previously worked with RSA that had Archer, great product. But it's not for the faint of heart to implement because it includes things like financial risk. It includes things like business risk. Where we narrow ours, to be very clear on the definition, is specifically around cyber risk. Now, that may fall into business resilience and other aspects as well. But what we focus on is making sure that those areas of risk associated with you doing business in the digital world are addressed and on your roadmap to be able to lower that risk on a continuous basis. And what I mean by that is cyber risk can be external threats. It can be internal threats, such as people doing bad things accidentally, or bad people doing things internally that are also bad, or a third-party vendor coming in your environment, as an example. And so cyber risk is where we focus when we talk about cyber risk as a definition. And that would be all the way from implementation, getting the best value out of your products, as well as your surface operations around that. Because what we do find in that definition is a lot of people have NIST 853 or PCI or some standard that they operate to, but come to find out what they say they do is not actually what they're doing operationally. And if you talk to a lawyer, that is the biggest legal liability you can have. It's much better to be naive and not do things. It is better to not be aware of things or say, not say anything about something than it is to say, I do this and then not do it, because that creates a legal expectation for your clients, for your partners, for your investors, and so forth.
That's exactly where I wanted to go next, because we talked about the evolution of threats, but the evolution of cyber industry regulations is pretty staggering as well. And many organizations have got numerous. They might have HIPAA, they might have PCI DSS. Now they're trying to comply with maybe not SEC standards, but there's plenty out there.
Yeah.
How can a risk-based approach to their cybersecurity help them make sure they stay aligned with the regulations that they're following, as you say?
Yeah, and this is one of the things, if you go out and you're a healthcare company and you do a search on cyber risk or managed services or any number of things, you're going to get something that looks like it's very customized for healthcare. And we do the same thing, by the way. But call it 80%, 90%, depending on the company or the organization, are really tied back to fundamentals that apply to every organization. And so if you look at PCI, if you look at GDPR, if you look at HIPAA, you look at all these regulations and standards, and then you also look at these new state laws, those really tie back to some fundamental things. Am I doing the things I need to do 24/7 to monitor my infrastructure? Do I have the basic standards in place to protect my environments, like multi-factor authentication, patch management, those types of things? And do I have the response capabilities to respond by the periods of time or in the detail needed, such as like a DFARS regulation, a CMMC, a PCI? All of those regulations are really got a lot of common controls down in the core. And so that's what we focus on, is where is your most critical data? What would be the impact to your business if that critical data is compromised? And that might be PII, that might be other information like healthcare information, retail information, credit card information, those types of things. But are you putting a standard around those systems? Unless you're a government organization, you probably don't need the equivalent of what I would call an enclave controls. You probably can run the same common controls across your environment. You can go one step further, such as like in healthcare, where you would have the equivalent of an enclave for patient care network. You would have an enclave for your PCI network. You would have an enclave for various other things. But you want that corporate controls, and then you want those common controls. And often they're overlapping. So being able to build a program that allows you to keep those in sight and understand your business risk, that's the critical aspect, so you don't feel like you're constantly just reactionary mode to everything.
Doug, what are the questions you recommend these organizations ask of their potential MDR providers to ensure that they're taking a risk-based approach to cybersecurity?
Yeah, I think, and this is, so every MDR player today, if you go to their website, they're going to say they have some cyber risk program, right? And so really questioning and understanding what is that? Is that just a questionnaire upfront one time that you never use again, or potentially don't even use during the implementation? Is that taking into consideration what I call a trifecta of information? So am I looking at the right assets? Do I understand the vulnerabilities of those assets? Do I understand where that information is? And then lastly would be the key aspect is, do I understand the risk of a user? Because, Tom, you may pass every phishing test there is in the world, but let me assure you, there are a lot of employees that fail every phishing test that you send them.
Often very senior in the organization as well.
Exactly. And so treating that individual in their unique risk profile is critical for an MDR player as well. So you may say, for example, that, Bob fails every phishing test and everything. So one, you want to limit the systems that he has access to, and then ultimately put him in a different profile that has multi-factor authentication, higher EDR controls around it, those types of things. The MDR player should be doing those things for you. And so understanding if they're asking questions about those four areas in the initial trifecta of where the information is and what systems it's on is a critical, I could call it a sniff test, to make sure that they really are talking about, not just talking about what they're doing with cyber risk, but actually implementing that with data in your systems.
Good. Doug, talk to me about Pondurance. What are you doing to help your customers embrace risk-based cybersecurity and really get the most out of their programs?
Yeah, so like I said, we have integrated in my cyber scorecard into the MDR. So we're constantly making the managed detection and response 24/7 service better and better every day. And integrating now more elements of everything I just talked about with cyber risk into the program, which is a little, if you think about it, like that's not what you would expect of an MDR player, but we think it's so critical to drive the right programmatic decisions for a client that you really want to have that in. The second aspect of that is we know that clients need guidance in particular service areas as well. So they may have a regulatory compliance requirement for California, for retail, for healthcare, for whatever regulatory impacts they may have. And so we have a consulting team specifically around that we can help guide them. And lastly, unfortunately, you mentioned like, how are you helping the clients? Unfortunately, a third of our clients come to us from cyber insurance. And so we're on 35 cyber insurance panels. Those cyber insurance panels bring us a client, unfortunately, when they're in breach or suspected breach, and we clean them up. So about a third of our business comes when a client is in their most desperate situation, and that is in the middle of the breach. And so our goal is not just, hey, figure out what they have, stop the breach, and ultimately make sure it doesn't have that same exploit capability in the future, but rather, how do we build that program with that client longer term, including obviously those services that help them prevent a longer term cyber risk from having a negative impact on them.
Let's help our audience members not get introduced to you in a time of crisis. Where can they go to get more information about risk-based cybersecurity?
Yeah, so Pondurance.com, we always have the ability for you to ask questions, chat with us, get a person on the phone, and we do all of that stuff, obviously, for free. We're at all the industry events as well. We're heavily into healthcare. We do a lot within the retail space, and as I mentioned, cyber insurance. So we're at a lot of events, ISACA events, and various other things. So always look for us there as well. But certainly, if for some reason you've got an urgent need or you want to talk, feel free to reach us at Pondurance.com, chat, submit, and ultimately we'll give you a call back really quick.
Excellent. Doug, always appreciate it. Thank you for your time and insight.
Thank you.
Again, the topic is in risk-based cybersecurity. You just heard from Doug Howard, the CEO of Pondurance. For Information Security Media Group, I'm Tom Field. Thank you for giving us your time and attention today.